Staff Sergeant James Cooper stepped off the airport shuttle bus into the warm afternoon sun. After spending 15 months in the dusty heat of Afghanistan, the clean streets of his small hometown in Ohio felt like another world. He adjusted the straps of his army backpack, still wearing his Army Combat Uniform, ACU, since he hadn't had time to change after his long flight. The familiar sights and sounds of Main Street brought back memories from before his deployment. Children were playing in the nearby park, and the smell of fresh bread from Joe's bakery filled the air. Everything looked exactly the same, yet somehow different through his experienced eyes. Cooper checked his phone again, smiling at the text messages from his younger sister Amy asking when he would be home. She had no idea he was already in town. None of his family did. He had planned this surprise return carefully, wanting to see their faces when he walked through the front door unannounced. But first, he needed his favorite coffee from Linda's coffee shop, just 3 blocks away. The thought of Linda's special caramel latte made his mouth water. During his deployment, he had dreamed about that coffee more times than he could count. The instant coffee they had on base never came close to matching it. As Cooper walked down the sidewalk, several people nodded and smiled at him. A few even thanked him for his service. This was different from his last deployment's return when people had mostly ignored soldiers. Times had changed, and the public's support felt genuine now. His combat boots made a steady rhythm on the concrete as he walked. The weight of his backpack felt light compared to the heavy gear he had carried on patrol in Afghanistan. Cooper's mind drifted to his team there, Martinez, Williams, and Thompson. They had become like brothers during their time together. Martinez was probably already home in Texas, while Williams and Thompson had another month left on their tour. A group of schoolchildren passed by, their backpacks bouncing as they ran. One small boy stopped and stared at Cooper with wide eyes, clearly impressed by the uniform. Cooper gave him a friendly smile and a small wave. The boy grinned back before running to catch up with his friends. It reminded Cooper of himself at that age, when he used to dream about becoming a soldier. The crosswalk was just ahead, and Linda's coffee shop was visible on the other side of the street. Cooper could already imagine the bell chiming as he pushed open the door, the familiar smell of fresh coffee beans, and Linda's surprised expression when she saw him. She had been like a second mother to him since high school, always keeping a fresh cookie waiting whenever he visited. Traffic was light for this time of day. Cooper noticed every detail around him, an old habit from his military training that had only grown stronger during his deployment. He saw the mother struggling with her stroller near the bookstore, the businessman talking loudly on his phone outside the bank, and the 3 motorcycles approaching the intersection a bit too fast. His training had taught him to always be aware of his surroundings, to notice the small details that others might miss. As a combat engineer, he had learned to spot anything out of place, anything that might signal danger. Even now, back home in the safest place he knew, those instincts remained sharp. Cooper reached the crosswalk button and pressed it, adjusting his stance as he waited. The weight of his dog tags felt familiar against his chest, a constant reminder of who he was and what he had experienced. In his pocket, his phone buzzed again, probably another text from Amy wondering about his arrival time. The afternoon sun felt good on his face as he waited for the light to change. This moment of peace, standing on a familiar street corner in his hometown, meant more to him than he could express. After months of tension and vigilance in a war zone, the simple act of waiting at a crosswalk felt like a luxury. Little did Cooper know that this peaceful moment was about to be interrupted. The 3 motorcycles he had noticed earlier were getting closer, and their riders had spotted his uniform. What started as a quiet afternoon was about to become much more interesting. The 3 motorcycles roared closer to the intersection, their engines making more noise than necessary. Cooper watched them approach, his military training automatically noting details about the riders. The leader wore a black leather vest covered in patches, some of which Cooper recognized as fake military badges. This small detail made his jaw tighten slightly. Behind the leader rode 2 other men on newer motorcycles. They were younger, probably in their mid-20s, wearing matching leather jackets with a local motorcycle club symbol on the back. Cooper had seen this symbol around town before, usually associated with minor trouble at local bars. The light turned red, but instead of stopping behind the white line, the lead biker inched his motorcycle forward deliberately. The front wheel crossed the pedestrian crossing, then another foot, until his bike completely blocked the crosswalk. His 2 friends pulled up beside him, spreading out to take up more space. Their engines continued to rumble loudly, spewing exhaust into the warm afternoon air. Cooper stood perfectly still, his combat boots planted firmly on the sidewalk. He noticed how the lead biker's hands gripped his handlebars too tightly, showing white knuckles under his fingerless gloves. The man's face held a smirk as he looked directly at Cooper's uniform, clearly trying to provoke a reaction. The two younger bikers started laughing, nudging each other and pointing at Cooper. One of them pulled out his phone, probably hoping to record whatever was about to happen. Their behavior reminded Cooper of young recruits trying to act tough on their first day of basic training. A small crowd began to gather on both sides of the street. An elderly couple quickly crossed to the other side, giving the bikers a wide berth. A group of teenagers stopped outside the coffee shop, phones ready to record. The businessman Cooper had noticed earlier stepped back into the bank, already dialing on his phone. The walk signal began blinking its white walk symbol, but Cooper didn't move. His training had taught him that rushing into any situation was a mistake. He took a moment to survey his surroundings, just as he would have done on patrol. The coffee shop's security camera was pointed right at them. Two delivery trucks were stopped at the red light, their drivers watching intently. And something else caught his attention, a police car parked half a block away, partially hidden by a delivery van. The lead biker revved his engine again, the sound echoing off the buildings. "Something wrong with your legs, soldier boy," he called out, his voice carrying a mocking tone. His friends laughed louder, trying to add to the intimidation. Cooper noticed more details about the leader now. A faded military tattoo on his neck looked too new to match the age of the unit it represented. His vest had patches from different military branches mixed together in a way that no real veteran would wear. He was trying to project an image of military connection, but to Cooper's trained eye, it was clearly fake. The two younger bikers continued their show, revving their engines and inching forward until they had created a wall of motorcycles across the entire crosswalk. More people had stopped to watch, and the crowd on both sides of the street grew larger. Some had their phones out, recording the scene. Cooper remained calm, his posture relaxed but ready. 15 months in Afghanistan had taught him how to read threatening situations, and this one wasn't nearly as dangerous as what he had faced overseas. He noticed how the younger bikers kept looking to their leader for cues, how their forced laughter had a nervous edge to it. The traffic light went through another cycle, and still, Cooper waited. His patience seemed to frustrate the bikers, who had expected him to either back down or get angry. Instead, he stood like a statue, his face showing no emotion, his eyes steadily watching their every move. Just then, Cooper's phone buzzed in his pocket. Another text from his sister. The sound seemed to trigger something in the lead biker, who finally shifted his weight and started to get off his motorcycle. The moment Cooper had been waiting for was about to begin, but not in the way these bikers expected. The lead biker swung his leg over his motorcycle and planted his boots firmly on the pavement. He stood a few inches taller than Cooper, using his height to try to look more threatening. The fake military patches on his vest seemed to mock everything Cooper had fought for during his deployment. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Cooper said calmly, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came from leading troops in combat. "Mind backing up behind the line? It's a safety hazard." His words were polite, but his eyes never left the lead biker's face. The leader took 2 heavy steps forward, bringing himself chest to chest with Cooper. The smell of old cigarettes and cheap beer rolled off him in waves. "What did you say to me, soldier boy?" he growled, trying to make his voice sound deeper than it naturally was. Cooper didn't step back. His combat boots remained planted exactly where they were, his posture relaxed but ready. He had faced down armed insurgents in Afghanistan. This attempt at intimidation seemed almost childish in comparison. "I said it's a safety hazard," he repeated, speaking as if he were explaining something to a new recruit. The two younger bikers killed their engines and dismounted, moving to flank their leader. They tried to look tough, but Cooper noticed their nervous glances at each other. His trained eye caught the slight tremor in one's hands, the way the other kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk now, phones recording the scene. Cooper was aware of every person around them. The teenage boys outside the coffee shop, the elderly couple watching from the bank's doorway, the delivery truck driver who had stepped out of his vehicle for a better view. "You got a problem with how we park?" the leader asked, poking a finger toward Cooper's chest, but stopping just short of touching him. "Because we can make this real interesting real quick." His two friends moved closer, trying to look menacing but keeping just out of arm's reach. Cooper's mind flashed back to his combat training. He noted the positions of all three men, calculated distances, identified potential threats and escape routes. But he also remembered something his commanding officer had told him: the best fights are the ones you avoid. "No problem at all," Cooper replied, his voice still calm and professional. "Just suggesting you follow the law. Those are some interesting patches you got there." He gestured toward the leader's vest, where mismatched military insignias were randomly sewn. "Mind telling me which unit you served with?" The question seemed to catch the leader off guard. His confident smirk faltered for a moment as his eyes darted down to his own vest. The two younger bikers exchanged uncertain looks, sensing their leader's discomfort. "That's none of your business," the leader snapped, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Cooper noticed a bead of sweat running down the man's temple despite the mild temperature. Meanwhile, Cooper's peripheral vision caught movement behind the bikers. The police car he had noticed earlier had silently moved closer, its officers watching the scene carefully. He also recognized one of the officers, Marine Sergeant Mike Thompson, who he had trained with years ago at Camp Pendleton. The lead biker, unaware of the police presence, took another step forward. "Maybe you need to learn some respect," he growled, his right hand curling into a fist. His two friends moved closer, trying to look intimidating but clearly unsure about actually starting a fight. Cooper remained perfectly still, his military training keeping his breathing steady and his mind clear. He knew he could handle these three if necessary, but he had a better plan in mind. His eyes met those of the lead biker, and he spoke clearly enough for the growing crowd to hear. "Sir, I'll give you one more chance to back your bikes up behind the line," Cooper said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had commanded troops in real combat situations. "After that, things are going to get interesting, but not in the way you're thinking." The lead biker's face turned red with anger. "What if we don't feel like moving?" he sneered, taking another step closer to Cooper. His breath was heavy with the smell of stale cigarettes, and a vein pulsed visibly on his forehead. Behind him, his two friends spread out wider, creating a half circle around Cooper. Cooper's mind automatically went into tactical mode, just as it had done countless times in Afghanistan. He noticed how the younger biker on the left kept his weight on his back foot, revealing his uncertainty. The one on the right had his phone out, probably hoping to record a video of their leader beating up a soldier. The growing crowd of onlookers had fallen silent, their phones recording the scene. Cooper could hear the quiet murmur of someone in the crowd calling 911, though he already knew help was nearby. The police car he had spotted earlier had moved even closer, now just half a block away. "Last warning," Cooper said calmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led troops through far worse situations. "Back up your bikes, and we can all go about our day." His hands remained relaxed at his sides, but his body was prepared for any sudden movements. The lead biker laughed, but it sounded forced. "You think that uniform makes you tough?" He reached out and poked Cooper's chest with his finger. "I've dealt with plenty of military types before." The fake patches on his vest seemed to mock his own words. Cooper didn't move an inch when the biker touched him. Instead, his mind calculated distances and angles, just as he had done while leading patrol units. The leader was 2 feet away, his right hand now clenched into a fist. The biker on the left was 4 feet away, looking increasingly nervous. The one on the right had backed up slightly, still filming. A delivery truck driver had stepped out of his vehicle, looking ready to help if needed. The teenagers outside the coffee shop had stopped laughing and were watching with concerned faces. Even the traffic at the intersection had slowed down as drivers tried to see what was happening. The lead biker suddenly grabbed Cooper's collar, but before he could do anything else, Cooper's training took over. In one smooth motion, he took hold of the biker's wrist and shifted his stance slightly. He didn't hurt the man, but the grip was firm enough to make the biker realize he had made a serious mistake. "That's assault on military personnel," Cooper said quietly, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. The two younger bikers stepped back, their attempt at looking tough completely forgotten. One of them lowered his phone, clearly not wanting to record evidence of their leader's actions. The lead biker tried to pull his hand away, but Cooper's grip remained steady. Years of combat training had given him the kind of strength that didn't need to be flashy or aggressive. He held the biker just firmly enough to prevent any further escalation without causing pain. "Let go of me," the leader demanded, his voice cracking slightly. The tough guy act was falling apart quickly. Sweat ran down his face despite the mild weather, and his eyes darted around, looking for a way out of the situation he had created. Cooper could hear car doors opening behind the crowd, followed by the sound of boots on pavement. He knew without looking that his old friend Officer Thompson and his partner were approaching. The bikers, focused entirely on Cooper, remained unaware of the approaching law enforcement. "Here's what's going to happen," Cooper said, his voice low enough that only the bikers could hear him. "I'm going to let go of your wrist. You're going to step back. Then we're all going to have a nice chat with the officers behind you about traffic laws and impersonating military personnel." The color drained from the lead biker's face as he finally heard the footsteps approaching from behind. His two friends had already started backing away toward their bikes, but they stopped when Officer Thompson's voice rang out clearly. "Nobody move." Officer Mike Thompson approached the scene with his partner, Officer Sarah Rodriguez, both moving with practiced confidence. The crowd parted to let them through, phone still recording everything. Cooper maintained his calm grip on the lead biker's wrist, waiting for the right moment to release him. "Having some trouble here, gentlemen?" Thompson asked, his voice carrying the authority that came with 10 years on the force. His eyes met Cooper's, and a flash of recognition passed between the two former Marines. They had trained together years ago, before Thompson had joined the police force. The two younger bikers had completely lost their tough guy attitude. One had already put his hands up, while the other tried to hide his phone, probably regretting recording their leader's assault on Cooper. Their motorcycles were still blocking the crosswalk, engines cooling in the afternoon sun. "No trouble at all, officer," Cooper replied professionally, slowly releasing the lead biker's wrist. "We were just discussing proper crosswalk etiquette and the importance of respecting military insignias." His voice remained steady and calm, the same tone he had used to diffuse tense situations in Afghanistan. Officer Rodriguez had already started running the motorcycle license plates through their system. Her fingers moved quickly across the patrol car's computer while Thompson kept his attention on the group. The lead biker was now standing very still, his earlier confidence completely gone. "I see," Thompson said, looking at the fake military patches on the leader's vest. "Sir, would you mind showing me some ID?" He directed this question to the lead biker, who had started to sweat even more. The man's hands shook slightly as he reached for his wallet. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, but people kept their distance, creating a wide circle around the scene. The teenagers outside the coffee shop were still recording, and the delivery truck driver had stayed nearby, ready to serve as a witness if needed. Officer Rodriguez walked back from the patrol car, her face serious. "Mike, we've got some issues here," she said professionally. "The plates on these bikes don't match their registrations, and one of them is coming up as reported stolen last month in Carson City." The lead biker's face went pale. His two friends exchanged panicked looks, and one of them took a small step backward, as if thinking about running. Cooper noticed the movement and shifted his stance slightly, ready to react if necessary. "Nobody move," Thompson commanded, his hand resting casually on his belt. "We're going to sort this out right here." He turned to Cooper, maintaining his professional demeanor despite recognizing his old friend. "Staff Sergeant, would you mind giving us your account of what happened?" Cooper nodded and began explaining the situation clearly and precisely, just as he would give a mission report. He described how the bikers had deliberately blocked the crosswalk, the leader's aggressive behavior, and the attempted assault. Several people in the crowd nodded along, their phones providing plenty of video evidence. The two younger bikers started talking over each other, each trying to distance himself from the situation. "It was all his idea," one blurted out, pointing at their leader. "He said we were just going to mess with some random soldier. We didn't know about the stolen bike." Officer Rodriguez had called for backup, and two more patrol cars were approaching with their lights on but sirens silent. The lead biker seemed to shrink into himself, knowing his tough guy act had led to serious consequences. His fake military patches suddenly looked even more pathetic in the afternoon sun. Thompson looked at the patches on the leader's vest again, his jaw tightening. As a former Marine, he took stolen valor seriously. "Sir, we're also going to discuss your interesting choice of military decorations. Impersonating military personnel is a serious offense in this state." The sound of more police cars arriving filled the air as Cooper stepped back, letting the officers take control of the situation. His training had helped him handle the confrontation perfectly, and now justice would take its proper course. The scene at the crosswalk had transformed into a flurry of police activity. 3 patrol cars were now parked strategically around the intersection, their blue and red lights reflecting off nearby windows. Officer Thompson stood with Cooper, taking his official statement, while Officer Rodriguez questioned the 3 bikers separately. "Last chance to back up your bikes," Cooper recalled saying to the group, describing the moments before the situation escalated. Thompson nodded as he wrote, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Both men knew how differently things could have gone if Cooper hadn't kept his cool. The lead biker sat on the curb, his head in his hands. His tough guy image had completely crumbled as the police ran his ID. It turned out he had an outstanding warrant for assault in a neighboring county. The fake military patches on his vest seemed to mock him now as officers documented them as evidence of stolen valor. The 2 younger bikers were singing like birds, eager to save themselves. They revealed how their leader had convinced them to join his motorcycle club 2 months ago, promising excitement and brotherhood. Instead, they found themselves involved with stolen motorcycles and fake military credentials. "We didn't know the bikes were stolen," the shorter one insisted, his voice shaking. "He told us he bought them cheap from a friend." Officer Rodriguez wrote everything down, her face remaining professional but skeptical. The evidence in their phones would tell the real story. The crowd of onlookers had thinned somewhat, though many stayed to watch the drama unfold. The teenagers outside the coffee shop were still recording, likely making this incident the highlight of their social media feeds. The delivery truck driver had given his statement as a witness and was now back in his vehicle, ready to continue his route. A tow truck arrived to impound the motorcycles, its yellow lights adding to the colorful display at the intersection. The driver efficiently began loading the first bike, its chrome finish no longer gleaming as proudly as it had earlier. Each motorcycle would be thoroughly examined for evidence of theft and modification. Cooper watched as Thompson ran the serial numbers on the bikes through their system. The results confirmed what they suspected. All 3 motorcycles had been reported stolen from different locations across the state. The lead biker's small-time operation was turning out to be bigger than anyone had expected. "You handled this perfectly," Thompson said quietly to Cooper, taking a break from his paperwork. "Most people would have taken the bait and started a fight. You gave us time to get here and catch them red-handed." The 2 men shared a knowing look, their military training having served them both well in different ways. Officer Rodriguez approached with more news. "We found texts on their phones discussing other stolen bikes," she reported. "Looks like they're part of a larger theft ring. The FBI might want to get involved." The lead biker seemed to sink even lower on the curb at these words. The younger bikers were now being handcuffed and read their rights. They looked defeated, their earlier bravado completely gone. One of them glanced at Cooper with a mix of fear and respect, finally understanding how badly they had misjudged the situation. News vans began arriving at the scene, local reporters hungry for a story. "Stolen motorcycle ring busted by alert soldier" would make an interesting headline for the evening news. Cooper had no interest in being interviewed, preferring to let the police handle the media attention. Thompson finished taking Cooper's statement and closed his notebook. "You're free to go, Staff Sergeant," he said officially, then added with a smile, "unless you want to stick around for the media circus." Cooper shook his head, ready to continue his original mission of getting coffee and surprising his family. The lead biker was finally being handcuffed, his fake military patches documented as evidence. His attempt to intimidate a real soldier had led to the unraveling of his entire criminal operation. As he was led to a patrol car, he couldn't even look Cooper in the eye anymore. The afternoon sun was starting to dip lower as the scene at the crosswalk began to clear. The tow truck had finished loading all 3 motorcycles, their chrome finishes dulled by the police evidence tags now attached to their handlebars. Cooper watched as the truck pulled away, carrying the proof of how quickly bad decisions can change lives. Inside Linda's coffee shop, the teenagers who had recorded everything were already showing their videos to other customers. The footage clearly showed the lead biker's aggression and Cooper's calm handling of the situation. Someone had already uploaded a clip to social media, and it was quickly gathering views and supportive comments. Officer Rodriguez was finishing up the paperwork in her patrol car while Thompson coordinated with FBI agents over the phone. The stolen motorcycle ring had turned out to be connected to similar thefts in 3 neighboring states. What started as a simple crosswalk confrontation had uncovered a significant criminal operation. The lead biker sat in the back of a patrol car, his fake military patches now sealed in an evidence bag. His tough guy facade had completely crumbled as he watched his world fall apart. The 2 younger bikers were in separate cars, still trying to convince the officers that they knew nothing about the larger theft operation. Cooper finally walked into Linda's coffee shop, the bell above the door chiming just as he had imagined earlier. Linda herself was behind the counter, her eyes wide with recognition and surprise. "James Cooper," she exclaimed, quickly coming around the counter to give him a hug. "You're home, and I hear you've already been busy cleaning up our streets." The other customers in the shop turned to look at him, many of them having watched the scene unfold through the large front windows. An elderly man stood up and offered to buy Cooper's coffee. "Least I can do," he said with a respectful nod. "We saw how you handled those troublemakers. Did us proud, son." Cooper tried to decline politely, but Linda was already making his favorite caramel latte. "On the house," she insisted, adding an extra shot of espresso. "Though I think you've had enough excitement for one day." She smiled warmly, remembering how he used to study at her shop during high school. Through the window, Cooper could see news vans setting up their equipment. Reporters were interviewing witnesses, including the delivery truck driver who had stayed to watch everything unfold. The story would probably make the evening news, though that hadn't been Cooper's intention at all. His phone buzzed again, another text from his sister Amy. "Where are you? Mom's getting worried." Cooper smiled, knowing they had no idea he was just a few blocks away. The day's excitement had delayed his surprise homecoming, but maybe that was for the best. Now he had quite a story to tell them. Thompson walked into the coffee shop, having finished his initial reports. He ordered a black coffee and sat down across from Cooper, their old friendship evident in their comfortable silence. "You know," Thompson finally said, "some of those bikes were stolen from military veterans. Your little crosswalk standoff just helped a lot of good people get their property back." The news made Cooper feel even better about how things had turned out. His training had taught him to handle confrontations with minimal force, and today that approach had led to more justice than a simple fight ever could have. The lead biker's attempt to intimidate him had backfired spectacularly. Linda brought over Thompson's coffee, adding a freshly baked cookie for each of them. "Just like old times," she said warmly, remembering how Cooper and Thompson used to study together before they both joined the military. "Though you boys have certainly found more exciting things to do these days." Outside, the last patrol car was leaving with its lights off, the situation fully under control. The crosswalk was clear again, and normal traffic had resumed at the intersection. To anyone passing by now, it would be impossible to tell that just an hour ago, this spot had been the scene of such dramatic events. Later that evening, Cooper sat in his family's living room, surrounded by the happy chaos of his surprise homecoming. His mother had cried when he walked through the door, while his father had hugged him so tight it almost hurt. His sister Amy had screamed with joy, dropping her phone in excitement. Now they were all gathered around him, eager to hear about his unexpected adventure at the crosswalk. "It's all over social media," Amy said, showing him her phone. The video of the confrontation had gone viral, with thousands of shares and supportive comments. Local news stations had already run the story on their evening broadcasts, praising Cooper's calm handling of the situation. Some commenters were calling him a hometown hero. Cooper's father, a former police officer himself, nodded with approval as his son described how he had maintained his composure throughout the incident. "That's exactly what they taught us," he said proudly. "Let the troublemakers dig their own hole while you stay professional. Those bikers never stood a chance once they showed their true colors." His mother had prepared all his favorite foods for dinner, though she hadn't known he was coming home today. "I just had a feeling I should cook your favorites," she said with a knowing smile. The smell of her famous pot roast filled the house, mixing with the warm scent of fresh-baked apple pie. Officer Thompson had called earlier with an update. The FBI was very interested in the stolen motorcycle operation, which turned out to be larger than anyone had expected. The lead biker was facing multiple federal charges, and his fake military patches had led to additional charges of stolen valor. The 2 younger members were cooperating with authorities, hoping for lighter sentences. Cooper's old bedroom looked exactly as he had left it 15 months ago. His high school football trophies still lined the shelves, and his graduation photo hung on the wall next to his basic training picture. It felt strange but comforting to be back in this familiar space after everything he had seen in Afghanistan. As the evening went on, more friends and neighbors stopped by to welcome him home. News of his return and the Crosswalk incident had spread quickly through their small town. Each visitor wanted to hear his version of the story, and Cooper told it patiently, downplaying his own role and emphasizing how the police had handled everything professionally. His sister's friend Sarah, who worked at the local Veterans Center, shared some good news. 2 of the stolen motorcycles belonged to local vets who had been devastated by the thefts. Thanks to Cooper's intervention, they would be getting their bikes back after the police finished processing the evidence. "You know what impressed me most?" his father said later, as they sat on the back porch watching the sunset. "You used your training to solve the problem without throwing a single punch. That's real strength." Cooper nodded, remembering his commander's words about the best fights being the ones you avoid. Linda from the coffee shop had sent a box of his favorite cookies home with him, along with a card welcoming him back. The teenagers who had recorded the incident had become some of her best customers, retelling the story to anyone who would listen. She messaged to say business was booming thanks to the publicity. As night fell, Cooper sat in his old room, looking at his phone. Messages kept coming in from his unit buddies who had seen the viral video. They teased him about becoming famous but also praised his handling of the situation. "That's our Cooper," one message read, "fighting crime on his day off." The whole incident felt almost surreal now. What started as a simple trip to get coffee had turned into something much bigger. Cooper thought about how his military training had prepared him not just for combat, but for life's unexpected challenges. Staying calm, assessing the situation, and making smart decisions had served him well both overseas and at home. Tomorrow, he would properly catch up with Thompson and visit some other old friends. But for now, he was content to be home, surrounded by family, knowing that his actions had helped make his hometown a little bit safer. As he drifted off to sleep in his childhood bed, Cooper smiled, thinking that some battles are won not with fists or weapons, but with patience, discipline, and wisdom.